Hi, thank you for joining me. My name is Ian Gilbert, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at creating web animation and interactivity using Adobe Edge Animate. This program uses HTML5, CSS3 and JavaScript to allow you to create animation and interactivity that will work consistently across modern browsers, so modern web browsers, which will mean that you can use the animation and interactivity on smartphones, tablet devices, desktops and laptops. So you can see I've already started. I've already imported some images of this kind of greenery area, so the tree and the fields and the sky. So anytime you import an item or create an item in Adobe Edge, it puts the item into a div tag. And if you've never used div tags before, they are simply boxes. And what we then do is we can animate the boxes, we can convert the div tags, the boxes, to symbols and such. So at the top up here, we've got the elements panel, and you can see it's listing the current div tags. We've got a greenery div tag and the sky div tag. And you need to think of the elements really as layers, and we can rearrange to order. So very similar to the layers in programs like Photoshop. And as you can see, it's also kind of duplicated down here in the timeline. So let me show you what we've got. So if I just use the greenery area as an example, so you can see the overall rectangular shape, which is the div tag, and then inside it we've got a picture. Now, because I want to make this animation scalable later on, so it will scale widthways, I'm just going to do it widthways to accommodate a greater area or small area depending on the device. The image inside the div tag is actually bigger than the div tag. So let me just put it back and I'll show you this. So if I adjust the X value, which adjusts the position of the image, you can see the image is a lot bigger than the actual div tag. And this is going to allow it to scale. So we'll come back and use this option later on. So I've done that for the greenery area and for the sky. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at creating some animation, and animating in Edge is really flexible and actually quite easy to do. So I'm going to grab the text tool and I'm just going to create some text. I'm going to type in green fields, and I can then just resize it. So I'll get it fairly big. So I've just put the text in place where I want it to appear in my animation, and now I need to think about animating it. So I come down to the timeline. I'm going to have a slight pause, and then I want this text to come in from the right hand side and pretty much finish where it is now. So in the timeline, I'm going to give it a second before it starts to come in. So I'll just click here at a second, and we've got this timeline here, this kind of playhead. And what we can do with the playhead, we can actually kind of split it into two sections, the start and the end section. So I can either click on this little icon here, or as the instructions say, I can hit the P key and I can control it. So I'm happy where it is at the moment, so I want that to be my finishing position. So as I separate these two things, we've got a little pin. The pin kind of pins the object down. So I want to keep the object where it is. I want to pin it down at the end of the animation. So I move the pin to the end of the animation. Let's try 1.5 seconds. So I now need to think about the start position, and I don't really need to do much apart from actually move the text. So I'll move the text there. So I've changed the start position, and you can see what Edge has done. It's tweened it for me. So let's try it out. So I'm just going to test it by doing Command Enter on the Mac, and then it comes in and I can see what it's doing. So if I just replay that, you can see a couple of things going on. One thing is I can actually see the text outside of the stage, so outside of my document area, and I also want the text to come in a little bit nice. I want it to slow down as it gets to its final kind of place. So if I just click away from my text, I get the properties for the stage, and I can see the size, etc., width and height. and I've got something called Overflow, and Overflow is what's going kind of beyond the edges of the document. And at the moment it's set to visible. If I now set it to hidden and then just preview it again, you can see I only see the text when it actually appears on the stage. What I want to do next is actually slow down the animation, the text, as it gets to its final position. So what I can do is come down to this animation span here, and I can do a right click and go into easing. And we've got all different types of easing. At the moment it's set to linear, but if I come into something like easing out, the curve here, or the curve diagram, indicates what it's doing. So it's kind of slowing down as it's getting towards the end. But I like to kind of change it. So we've got all different variations of pretty much the same thing. So I'm going to go for quarter, I think. And then I'll just click away to get rid of that panel. And if I test it out, once again, you can see how it nicely slows down when it comes in. I'll just rewind that or refresh it so you can see that again. There you go, looking a lot nicer. So next I want to add another animation. So at the moment I'm still currently working on my animation. I can see this little blue indicator here. So if I just hit the P key again, it allows me then to work on the next section of animation. So let me move it to over here. Okay, so maybe a short while after I want an item to appear. So I'm going to grab this rectangle tool with the rounded corners, and I'm just going to drag out a rectangle. If I do want to control the corners, I can come into the corner options, and I can either use the one control to control all corners, or I can go into the individual corners and modify them. And what I'll do, just to make it a little bit easier to see, I will choose a different color for my rectangle. And I'll just adjust the corner value just down a bit. So next I want to create some more text to put in there. So I'm going to call it Adventure Park. And then I'll adjust the text so it will fit within there. And I'll just change the color of the text. Now at the moment I want to make it a little bit easier to kind of animate. So at the moment I've got two items, but I want to kind of treat them as one. So what I'm going to do is put the text inside the rectangle. So what you can do with div tags is basically put other div tags inside, and because these two items are within a div tag, it's possible. So let's take a look in the elements panel. So you can see here, I just kind of hide the element. This top item is the last item I created, so I'm just going to just rename that. Let's call it Adventure TXT, and then I'll just call this Adventure underscore rect for rectangle. So what I can do is drag the text over on top of the other div tag to put the text inside. You can see it's been offset, which basically now means that if I was to animate this in some way, both items get animated together. So it's a bit like grouping them. There is an option to group in Edge, but if you group, it would put these two div tags within another div tag. So now that we've got it in place, I want this to be a fade in animation. So I've got my playhead to where I want it to start. I want to keyframe the transparency of that item. I'm going to reduce it down to 0, which will hide it to start off with. And then what I'm going to do is move the timeline. I'll give it about 1.5 seconds. And then I'm going to increase the opacity. And what it will now do, it will fade in. Okay, so let's test it. Yeah, and I think that's looking pretty nice. What I might do is just slow down the fading in. So to slow it down, I can just give it a bit more time. And it's dead easy to do. Got these little diamond keyframes, and I can just move them over a bit to increase the amount of time, so it will be a slower fade in. And it's really easy to manipulate the animation. We can move the animation around. And if I wanted to, I could reverse the animation. I could do a right click and invert the transition. Okay, let's have a look at that. I'll just invert it. And then if I play it again, you'll see then it fades out. So let's swap that back. Let's invert it again. So next we're going to take a look at symbols, and symbols are great if you ever need to reuse an item. Let's say I want to reuse some animation. Symbols also allow for easy updating of multiple items, adding interactivity such as buttons. We can create buttons using a symbol, which we'll do later. But what we're going to use a symbol for now is to have an independent timeline. So one advantage of a symbol is that it has its own timeline. So we've got a timeline down here. That's for all the items on the stage, but a symbol has its own. So I'm going to use a symbol to animate some clouds. So I've already imported the item, and I've got it in my library. So I've got this image called clouds, and I'll just drag it in. And I'll start it there. And I'll just show you this image. It's actually quite a large image, and again it's so large because we're going to create the illusion of constantly moving clouds. So the image has to be a lot wider than the stage. So if I take a look at my current animation, I can see it's just over 5 seconds long, but I want the clouds to take longer than that. Okay, so this is the beauty of symbols. It's got its own timeline, and it will fit and work with my existing timeline. So I've got the image in. I'm going to right click and convert it to a symbol, and I'll simply call it clouds. Okay, I'm keeping this autoplay timeline on, so it automatically plays through its own timeline where the main timeline is also playing. I'm going to click OK. I then need to double click to get within the symbol, and you can see now I'm within the symbol because it says stage clouds. Okay, and if I look in my timeline, I can see all the other items are gone because I'm now in the timeline for the symbol. So let's go to the beginning of the timeline. So here it's 0. And to start off with, I'll just animate it for 4 seconds. So I'm happy where the cloud is starting. So when I hit the P to get the pin up, I can leave the pin at the start, and I will move this other item here to the end. So all I'm going to do is now move the clouds over. Okay, that's created my animation. I'll just hit the P key because I no longer need to animate it, hopefully. And I'm going to come to this timeline here, the span, and I'm going to just have a look at the easing option and just make sure it's back on linear. Okay, so I want a constant speed for my clouds. So let's try it. So you see the clouds come in, we've got this kind of repeating action, but then they stop. So after 4 seconds they stop. So what we need to now do is basically make the clouds loop. So let's take a look at how we do this. So I need to double click on the symbol again to get into its own timeline. and I'm going to create something called a label. So I just need to make sure that my timeline is at the beginning, because that's where I want to create the label. If I click on the Insert Label option, I'll just call this Start. Right, so by adding labels, we can make this timeline jump to different sections. Or should I say, we can make this playhead jump back to the start, or whatever we want to name it. So what I need to do, so the animation is going to play all the way through to the end, and then I need it to jump back to the start label. So at the end, I need to come in and add a trigger. So insert a trigger, and I'm going to tell it to play from, and then in a single quote, I'm going to type in start, finished by a single quote. So when the playhead gets to the end of the animation, it's now going to jump over the start label and play from there onwards, giving us a loop. So if I now test this again, you'll see that the cloud should hopefully be constantly looping. So let's close that down and it back. So I've got the clouds animated, they go pretty quick, so I'm now going to slow them down. So again, I double click on the clouds to get back into the symbol. I can just make the timeline a bit smaller, and what I'm going to do is just move the animation over, and I better make sure I get the trigger as well. I'll just zoom out a bit more, that's a bit better. To 20 seconds. There you go. So now the animation is 20 seconds long. When it gets to the end of the 20 seconds, it will jump back to the start label and play again from there. You also see in the panels on the right hand side, the library panel, I've now got a cloud symbol because that's what we've just been working on. And what I could always do with the cloud symbol is do a right click, rename it. Okay. And if I just come out of this mode here back to the stage, and if I also right click on it again now, because we're out of the symbol, we can do stuff like export it out to another project. So it can be used in another project. We can duplicate it, so we can have two versions that are perhaps very similar but with slight differences, and we can also edit it, same as clicking on it. Now what I can do, if I do want to reuse it, I can simply just drag it out and drop it on the stage. Okay, don't want to do that in this case. But what I have done is I've created another symbol which has clouds again, but the clouds animate even slower. So these will be my distant clouds, allow me to create a parallax effect where items in the distance go slower. So I'm going to import that symbol. So I'm going to click on this plus sign. I'm going to import the symbol. I'm going to choose it. Open it up. I'll just zoom out a touch. And then I'm going to drag this new one in. Okay, and you can see here, so it's quite a long one. I just need to get it into the right spot. So I'll just zoom in and have a look. Okay, that's looking like it's in the right place. And if I now preview it, okay, you can see we've got clouds running at different speeds. So the last thing I want to do with these symbols is actually place them behind the tree and behind my current animations. So in the Elements panel, I can drag the distant clouds symbol down to underneath the greenery element or layer, And I can do the same with the clouds, drag that down. And now all the clouds will go underneath the other items. So symbols are very, very useful. We're going to use a symbol now to create a button. And the button will allow the user to replay the animation. So buttons can be used for anything really. They can for navigation, for creating web links, many reasons. So to do this, we'll start off with a basic rectangle. I'm going to place this up in the top right corner and just drag it out. I'm going to grab the type tool and I'll just type in replay, and I'll make the text smaller. Just place it on top of that rectangle, and I'll just modify this rectangle a bit so it's a little bit smaller. And what I will do is actually change the text. Let me change the size of that text, make it a little bit smaller. Right. So just like we did with the animation down here, I want to keep the text and the rectangle together, so it's just like a button. So when we move the button, both items move as well. Now you can bring images in and make images into buttons, but I'm just going to stick with a basic rectangle. So I'm going to drag the text down into the rectangle. So basically that means the rectangle and the text move as one. And to make it into a button, it has to be a symbol. So I'm going to do a right click and choose convert to symbol, and I'll simply call it button. Actually, I'll make it a bit more specific. Let's call it replay button. So if I now double click on the symbol, I come into essentially symbol editing mode. I'll just make sure the playhead is back at the beginning at 0. So what I want to do in here is set up the interactivity for the button. So I want to control the button, how it looks when the mouse is outside the button. Also when the mouse is over the button, and also when the mouse button gets clicked downwards. So basically when I click on the button. So using labels to start off with, I'm going to insert a label for each different appearance. So I'm going to choose out, move my playhead, and the timing here doesn't really matter because it's simply going to jump from label to label. I'm going to add in another label, and it's going to be over, so that's when the cursor goes over the button. And then finally I'm going to have one for down, so when I click down on the button. So I'm going to come back to the out state, so that's its normal state, and I'm going to click on that rectangle, just making sure I've got the rectangle selected and not the text. And then over in the properties, I'm going to keyframe the color. So I'm basically recording the color for the out state. You can now see the background color has been recorded. I'm going to come to the over state. I'm going to choose a new color. Let's go for like a purplish color. As soon as I do that, it auto keyframes it for me because this little item here is on auto keyframing. So it saves me having to do it manually. And then for the down state, when I click on the button, I'm going to change the color again to, let's say, red. So now I've got my 3 different states. Now if I just click away from the rectangle, just so I get the properties of the button, so here's my replay button, I can see that autoplay is ticked at the moment, and that option we could choose, turn it on or off when we actually created the symbol, but I want to show you it here. So if autoplay is still ticked, it means that really the user can't interact with the button. The playhead will just move through and show all the different states. So let me show you this. Let me just preview. Okay, and you can actually see the button changing color. Not what we want. So I'm going to come back into the button, double click on it, and I'm going to turn off autoplay. So I want it to interact only when the user uses their mouse. So now that we've got the visual appearance of the button set up, I want to control and set up actions for when the user clicks on it or hovers over it. So what I can do, I'll just move my playhead back to the beginning. I can just right click on the rectangle. I can choose open actions for rectangle. And I'm going to do on mouse out. So that's when my cursor is outside of the button. When it's in that position, I want to stop at the out state. So again, in single quotes, I can simply type in out, just making sure I spell it exactly the same way as in the label. And then I'm going to add another action. So it's going to be mouse over. So I'm going to stop at, in this case, the over position. And then finally, one last one. I'm going to do mouse down. So when the user clicks down on the button. So we're going to stop at the down position. Again, I'm just double checking I'm spelling those right. So let's take a look. Let's close down this actions panel here and test it out. So you see the button no longer kind of animates itself. It doesn't autoplay. Put my cursor over it, it changes color. Move my cursor out, it goes back. If I click on it now, it goes red. But the button at the moment doesn't actually perform a task. So I want it to reset the animation. So to do that, I need to go back into the main timeline where the animation is. And just like we did with the symbol, the cloud symbol, I'm going to add a label right at the very beginning of the animation. And I'll just call it start again. And then what I can do with the button, I can do a right click. And now I'm going to tell the button to always jump back to the start of the animation and play. So I'm going to add an action. So when I click on the button, I'll just move this panel up a bit to play from. Again, I can type in start, close it down, and then let's give that a try. So I just let the animation come in so we can see if it's working, and then I can click on the button and it replays the animation. So a nice way of navigating through different sections of an animation. Now the last thing I want to do to the button is actually have my cursor change when my cursor goes over the button. And it's a very easy task to do. So with the button selected, still I can come over to the cursor section, click on auto, choose this little hand, and if I now was to test it all out, you can see that the cursor now changes. Now, every so often when you test it out, there's almost like a little stuttering going on as all the content is getting downloaded into the browser. So what we can do, just like you've got in Flash, you've got the little preloaders at the beginning of a Flash animation, we can also do that with HTML. So in Adobe Edge, I've just made sure I've got the stage selected and nothing else. And you can see here we've got a preloader section. I'm going to click on the edit button and I can click on insert preloader clip art, So there's a few that you can choose, but you can always make your own because all they are animated GIFs. So I'm going to go with this one here. Click on that one and insert it in. So it gives me like a little preview of what it's looking like. And then what I can do in here, you'll see it's almost like a symbol itself. I can insert some text. I'll just type in downloading. Please wait. And at the moment the text is white, that's why we can't see it. Okay, there you go. Downloading, please wait. And what I can possibly do on any of these items, I could put in a link if I wanted to. So maybe if there's a fault, at least we can link them to maybe the website or another section of the website. So now I'm going to come out, back in, and if I just preview it now, you can see the preloader pops up, which just gives it a little bit more time to download the content to make sure our animation starts off smoothly. So now we're going to take a look at actually making this scalable, the whole animation scalable. So we're going to just do it in terms of the width. You could also do it in terms of the height as well. So first of all, we need to make the stage itself scalable. So I can see the stage up here at the moment is set to 640 pixels. And to make it scalable, we've got this little icon here that looks like a little switch. So what I can do is click on PX, and you see the switch goes down and it changes to %. So now the stage is 100% of the browser area. So however big your web browser page is, that's how big this animation will be, or how big the stage will be at the moment. Let's take a look. So you can now see that we see all the clouds, and the stage is white, but it does extend all the way across. So what I will do, just so it's a little bit easier for you to see, I will change the color of the stage. Change the color. Okay, let's change the color like that. That's it. And then, yeah, you can see now easily see the color. Next thing I want to do is scale the greenery area. Okay, now what we got up here is this little indicator now, and it's got two little symbols, and what we can do is actually preview how it stretches actually without going to a browser. So you can see as I drag over, the image area is not expanding at the moment, so I need to first of all make the div tags expand. So for the greenery, I'll just make sure it's selected in the elements. I can come to the div tag itself up here, and I'll tell it to be 100% as well. And then if I test it out now, you can see what it does. It stretches the div tag, but it also distorts horribly the image. So what I want to be able to do is control how the image is treated, basically. So what I can do is come to this little symbol here. I've got loads of ways of doing it, so different ways of scaling position and stuff like that. Now I don't really want to scale the image, so if we remember back right to the beginning of this presentation, I showed you that image is actually a very long image. So I don't want to scale it because it's long enough, wide enough, but instead I want to clip it. Okay, so however big the div tag is, it just clips a part of my image and doesn't scale it. So it's a bit like a mask. So if I now click apply, and you'll see now if I do stretch it out, it doesn't actually distort the image, it just allows me to show more of it. So I've done that for the greenery. I also need to do it for the sky. So let's click on the sky elements, set the width to 100%, and then change the kind of layout preset also to clipping, and I click apply. So let's now take a look. Okay, so it's working quite nicely. You can see the image area for these green hills isn't quite wide enough, but we'll fix that problem later on. And if I now scale the browser window, you can see it moves. Okay, so next I want to be concerned about is this button. I want the button always to stay over on the right hand side. And also I want the animation to scale as well. So let's take a look at those items. So I'm going to click on the button. Now over here in the position and size option, we can control how it kind of records its position. So at the moment it's up in the top left hand corner of the button. So I want to fix it to the top right hand corner of the stage. So I'll change its position over here, so relative to the top and right. Okay, and where it says X option here, so X is left to right, I'm going to set that to % as well. So if I just move this little thing here, I can see it's working. So the button is keeping its position. And I can do exactly the same for the animation as well. So if I move my playhead, so I can see the two animated bits of text, I'll click on them. And with these, I'll just set the X to %. And that will then sort out my animation for me. So as the stage grows, the animation will change accordingly. So let's again take a look at that. Okay, so the button is staying in place. The animation has now moved more to the center of the enlarged animation, and you can see it now keeps its position, which is quite nice. So what we now need to do is fix this problem here of there being no more image area. So I'm going to restrict the width of how big my animation can get, and also how small it can get as well. So to do that, I just need to make sure I've got no items selected, just the stage. And you can see here we've got a minimum width. So I want the minimum width to be 640. And it says maximum width. I just need to click where it says maximum width and detick none. I'm going to change this to be 1280. So twice its original size. And if I now preview what I've got, okay, you'll see it neatly scales. So it's perfect if you've got different devices that you want to appeal to, like the iPad or maybe just a normal laptop. You can test it out and kind of come up with different measurements so it works best on both, whilst keeping it still scalable. Right, so we've been using HTML5, CSS3 and JavaScript, and there's a chance that some of your users, or maybe even yourself, your browser on your device may not support them. So we need to now make this suitable for HTML5 users and non-HTML5 users. So let's take a look at how we can do this. So what we're going to do is create a static image. Okay, we can't do anything with the animated image. We're going to make a static image for someone who hasn't got a HTML5 browser. So I can move my playhead to an interesting part of the animation. So I'm going to move it to here. And then I'm going to capture this as an image. And this is what the user will see if they don't have a HTML5 browser. So over here in the properties, I can click on this little camera icon, and that will capture my animation, or capture a still image of my animation. So I'll click on the capture button. Next, I'm going to insert that image. You can see here it's inserted the image over in my library. It's called it poster.png. So I now need to click on the edit down level stage. This is the non-HTML5 option. Okay, it's asking me what image I want to insert. Okay, so I can click on insert. We can always swap this to a different image if we wanted to by using this little icon here. Right, so the non-HTML5 user gets a static image. And what we can now do is actually have this as a link. So I come in here, maybe if they didn't have a HTML5 browser but still wanted to navigate somewhere, or I want them to click on this and navigate to the website, I can change the link target from maybe self to new window. So they click on it and it will open up the link I'm about to put in a new browser window. So I can type in http:// and then I'll just type in the Academy class website address. Now what I could do on here, just so they know that they can click on it, I can actually add in some text. So I'll just type in click here to go to the website. Just reduce that in size. Right. So just giving the user a bit of information there. So what we've done now is we've created an animation using HTML5, CSS3 and JavaScript. We created the cloud animation using symbols, also the button using a symbol. We've used some actions to give a bit of interactivity. So the last stage now really will be to publish it. So let's just have a quick look at these options. So we can go to File, Publish. And that will just publish it out, but what I want to do really is go into the Publish Settings just to see what options we got. File, Publish Settings. And you can see here, mainly you probably want to publish to the web, but there is an InDesign option and iBooks option. So what we could do here is just publish it out. Okay, I'm going to miss this step. And what it will do, it'll create you a HTML file and lots of other files. So you could either use it that way, just by using the HTML file, or you can put the code that's created in the HTML file into an existing website, so you can actually include it in another website. So this program is starting to get really, really good, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video.